Welcome to the final day of the MedConference. So a recent study showed that in Canada, about 40% of nurses leave the profession by age 35. Nicola is 35. So why do they leave? So there's, of course, difficult work conditions, long hours, mandatory extra time. And then for the ones that remain, or even for all the doctors that are still working in the field, there could be a risk of becoming cynical due to all these inhuman working conditions in the hospitals. So we've asked two people here this morning. So we have Nicola, a nurse, and Dr. Cristiano Ferrario, to tell us, I have two questions for them. One, why they chose to study nursing and medicine respectively, but also why they still decide now, after quite a few years of practice, to remain in their field and do the work they do. So why do you work? And I mean, of course, we all work here to survive, to put food on our table, but the question is deeper than that. What really sustains you in your work? So Nicola is a registered nurse, qualified nurse, specializing in home supportive and palliative care with more than a decade of experience. Nicola is currently a home support nurse at the ANT Foundation and a home palliative care nurse at Umana Oncology Association for Luigi Sacco Hospital and Don Carlo Gnocchi Foundation in Milan, in Italy. Nicola holds a bachelor's degree in nursing from University of Milan. He studied philosophy and theology at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome and is currently attending a master's degree program in management with coordinating functions of healthcare professionals at Unipegaso Telematic University. Then we have Dr. Ferrario. He got his medical degree from the University of Milan in 2001, medical oncology certification in 2005, and in 2011 he completed 4 years of clinical fellowship in breast and genital urinary cancers. Since 2013, he's been an attending staff in oncology at the Jewish General Hospital and assistant professor in oncology at McGill University, responsible for the conduct of multiple clinical trials for cancer patients and the supervision of training of several oncology residents and fellows. In 2022, he left a year and he went back to Italy, where he worked in home palliative care at his hometown hospital in Valle Olana. So we'll start with Nicola.
Good morning. I want to special thanks to all the speakers from these past few days, because you have helped me understand many aspects of both my work and my personal journey. What I'm about to share with you is a brief story, both personal and professional, that began just before the pandemic. I hope it gives you a chance to see how many of the themes discussed these past days truly connect with who we are and the work we do. To better explain what I want to share, I need to give you a brief overview of where I come from, about the opportunities and the challenges related to both being a nurse and being an entrepreneur in Italy. In Italy, unfortunately, we don't have the different levels of nursing education and career path like you do in North America. In your system, we would all be considered a registered nurse, even after earning a PhD or several master's degrees. We have the tradition of one of the most recognized and comprehensive nursing education systems in Europe, but in our culture, nurses are often undervalued. Parents normally would not encourage their children to study nursing or take it up as a career. It's often seen as a fallback option. Nurses everywhere work under physical and emotional stress, always understaffed, typically with a heavy work schedule, and yet some of the lowest salaries in the Western world. In fact, the dropout rate from nursing school is high. In the first 5 years of work, many nurses leave their job. For example, one of my first jobs after graduation, was in a long-term care facility for elderly patients with chronic conditions. In that context, it was normal to be the only nurse for the night shift, caring for the needs of over 80 patients on 4 different floors. Switching now to business conditions. When it comes to business, Italy is one of the countries in which it's most complex and expensive to start or run a business because of a huge amount of bureaucracy, especially in healthcare, and high taxes. For comparison purpose, in the US, starting a company costs around $2,000 to $3,000, whereas in Italy, after factoring management costs, declarations, and related taxes, it's nearly impossible to do it for less than 30,000 euros. So the context I come from would seem to discourage anyone who wants to be a nurse or start a business. And instead, I decided to do both. So, why I've decided to become a nurse? I never liked studying. I was a good student, but I never had a passion for studying. After high school, I wasn't planning to continue my education. I thought I'd find a job where I could easily see the concrete results of my work, maybe as a carpenter. The same year, in 2008, I met 3 nurses through some friends. I listened to them talk about their work and I was blown away. They were the first adults I had met, I was 18 at the time, who spoke about their jobs with extreme realism. They didn't shy away from talking about the challenges, but they didn't complain either. It was something new for me to see someone so passionate about what they did, so dedicated to helping others. Their enthusiasm was contagious. I started thinking that maybe I could follow their path, but I didn't say anything about it at first. Then a friend pointed out to me in a conversation that I was always eager to help others and that I seemed happier in doing that. The simple remark gave me the courage to reconsider my idea of not wanting to study any further and try this new direction instead. The final turning point came when I read a text about vocation in choosing a career. This text invited me to reflect on my whole self, my personality, my temperament, my physical abilities, my education, my story, my weaknesses, and my talent, and to ask myself how I can use all of this for something good, something that makes me happy. That question, something good and that makes me happy, captured my heart. Even after 10 years of working, while money, joy type, and condition are important for me, work needs to be meaningful, something that brings beauty and makes me happy. But I have to rediscover that over time. At the beginning of 2020, when the COVID pandemic started, I was going through a very difficult and painful period of my life, both financially and personally. I didn't see much meaning in being a nurse or in my daily life at that point. I was in distress and just knew I wasn't happy. During the first wave of pandemic, I worked in Bergamo, near Milan, for 7 months in intensive and sub-intensive care units. Bergamo was the first and the worst epicenter of pandemic in Italy. I was doing shifts of 15 to 20 hours a day, like many others during that time. When the situation slowed down, I was asked to work in the operating room at the Humanitas Hospital in Milan, as they had to catch up on nearly a year worth of surgeries delayed by the pandemic. These 2 work periods was incredibly intense, both physically and mentally. By the end of 2020, as the second wave of COVID hit, this time affecting people in their homes rather than hospitals, I paused to reflect. I saw how many friends need help managing the virus while the Italian healthcare system was collapsing. It was impossible to reach the family doctors and obtain COVID testing. Emergency rooms were too full to provide COVID testing. That's when I had the idea to start a company, and I founded T-Care. It was a response to the growing need for home-based COVID management and testing services. I started alone, using what little savings I had to buy a few hundred COVID tests, and began providing home testing services. Within a week, I had already recovered my investment, and I was receiving 200 to 300 requests a day. Within 2 months, I brought on another nurse as a business partner, and we hired a secretary, an accountant, and a customer service rep. By the third month, TV companies and event organizers start contacting us, and then larger international corporations followed, requesting our prevention and on-site management services as they were organizing meetings and other in-person events with the ongoing restrictions. Within 6 months, our main clients included Meta and Boston Consulting, for whom we provide services across Europe. We are about 40 nurses and doctors working with us, both in Italy and abroad. For 4 months, I personally traveled across Italy, Germany, Spain, Portugal, and Ireland with Mark Zuckerberg and his team. Over 3 years, we reached a revenue of 1 million euros. Things were going very well. I had built something of my own that was truly successful, and I had created for myself a much more comfortable and attractive job as a nurse, with better hours and much better pay. But after 3 years of that, I had to admit I wasn't happy. This dissatisfaction translated into a gradually increasing struggle, having to go against myself to continue doing that job every day. My daily activities had become those of a manager, no longer those of a nurse. I was constantly in front of a computer and on the phone, no longer in front of people, of patients. At a certain point, I really had to ask myself and remind myself why, almost 10 years earlier, I had chosen to become a nurse. And my greatest fortune was to have good friends with whom I would ask those questions and discover the answers together. After 6 months of reflection discussions, I took the decision to leave my business, give all my shares to my partner, and return to actually work as a nurse. I sought work in home palliative care, a role I've been in for almost 2 years now. I chose this field partly because in my early years of work I had a very positive experience in hospice care, and partly because I sensed that I needed to return to what had initially fascinated and inspired me: dedication to others. During my startup years, I believed that my worth was measured by what I could achieve on my own and by the results I have attained. But in these recent years, I have experienced a deep sense of fulfillment in caring for people with terminal illnesses and supporting their families. I've especially discovered that I am more myself when I choose to be fully present with my patients, even with my own questions and wants. My experience is that when I come home overnight, I have to admit that the only difference between my patients and me is that they are affected by an illness in that moment, while I have the opportunity and the skills to serve and assist them, but really we are the same. When I enter a new patient's home for the first time, I think about the fact that they have 2 stories that I am stepping into: a story of illness and suffering, and a story of life with its joys and pains. Entering their home, where I am the guest, unlike when the patient comes from the hospital, which we might perceive as our own space, the first thing I find myself doing is enter their bedroom. If you think about your own home, when a stranger enters, they may have access to many places, but not your bedroom. It's the most intimate and personal space in our homes. Every time I'm here, I have learned to do 3 things. First, to ask the patient who they are, what they like, what they have experienced and what they are experiencing. Second, to observe the house, the book, the photos, the paintings, because often the place where someone lives and has chosen to spend their final days says a lot about them. And third, I have learned also to share about myself gradually over time and to avoid using my official title and role as a protective barrier. All of this serves the sole purpose to truly encounter my patients. From my personal experience, and I believe many of you have experienced this as well, I know that simply administering medication, changing a dressing, or applying proper clinical procedures is simply not enough to truly address the patient's needs, and my own needs too. While of these things are extremely important and necessary, and must be done with the utmost care, if they are done without truly engaging with the person in front of you, they become hollow, and I reduce my act to providing a service. If instead I take the risk of getting involved on a more personal level, the same medication or procedure takes on a whole new meaning and value for both the patients and me. Let me give you an example. I started caring for a patient a month ago who had been reported by a previous home care service as someone who wouldn't follow any therapeutic advice, didn't use the necessary aids, and did things his own way. Specifically, he refused to use the recommended air mattress, even though he had sores in various parts of his back. For me, the physician that was with me, it only took sitting down in front of him and asking him why he didn't want to follow the advice of using the mattress. We were simply available to spending a little more time with him than we had originally planned, in order to start understanding his reasons and doubts, which can basically be summarized as is not worth trying to fix a broken machine. Only then, through a conversation between two people, we explained again the benefit of using the hair mattress, showing him that it was for his greater good, and most important, in doing that, we somehow helped him to see what he couldn't see on his own, that he wasn't just a broken machine. When I left his house, he said he would think about it. The next morning, I found him smiling, lying on the hair mattress. Nobel Prize-winning Dr. Rita Levi-Montalcini, who suffered from multiple sclerosis, used to say that the challenge each of us must face, whether as a patient or as a healthcare professional, is to add life to days, not days to life. So, finally, I've learned two key things on this journey. We are people, so we can be present with patients. Being present matters, physically and personally. For me, this means remembering that there are two people to consider in every interaction, the patient and myself. If either of us is having a bad day, ignoring that only makes things harder. Recognizing it allows me to approach them differently. For example, in my team, there is an unwritten rule. If a patient calls us 3 times in one night in less than 2 hours, we go their home, even if there is nothing urgent. Most of the time, they just need us to be there, to answer the same question over and over, or to provide comfort. The second key is that being present with colleagues is equally valuable. In my team, we hold a weekly meeting, always preceded by a lunch together, to review each patient's care and discuss what's working and what is not. It's a moment we all look forward to, where we share not just the practical side of our work, but also personal insights. This moment builds trust among us, And the first one to notice the unit among us are our patients. So to wrap it up, when asked why I go to work, I can say that I do it not just for the usual financial reasons, but becoming my work allows me to be more myself, more human. Recently, someone there to me said, when you were running your business, you used to talk about what you did at work. Now you always talk about the people you meet and about who you are. For me, that's been the greatest discovery of all. Thank you.
It's the computer. It's a moment of. Is it coming? Yes.
Good. That's it. So thank you for this kind invitation, for the beauty of these days together, all the exchanges we had. I'm a creative oncologist, self-proclaimed. I have a million of conflicts of interest, but I don't think they're relevant to this talk. So I will spare them to you. The question that was asked obviously is very provocative, and I like it always brings us back to the beginning, no? Because the beginning is always a point that we can go back to and remains objective. My beginning is a bit of a strange story. That's an Italian spelling. It said Chicca. She used to be a friend of our family. She was a dear, dear friend of my parents, and basically I grew up with her as part of the family. And I was 16 when she was diagnosed with a serious cancer, and she passed away when I was 17. And that's my beginning. You know, many of us probably have a history that is our first history that reveals something about ourselves, you know, like an intuition we want to follow. And you know, sometimes I see young people around me and I can be skeptical about that, and I remember that, you know, that God took a very precise initiative in my life when I was 16, 17, and I wouldn't have bet, you know, one dime on my self-awareness at that point. But something happened that already with how I was, as unprepared as I was, stirred up my world. You know, it was the first time as a teenager that I was facing real suffering, and I thought I had faith, and this painful experience made everything questionable, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And even in the amidst all the, you know, even all the emotional ups and downs that a teenager can have, I think two things were very clear for me throughout in that year of suffering that I shared with all my family. The first one, like I was hinting to before, is that it was really convenient for me to be provoked to these questions. What's the meaning of suffering? What's the meaning of life altogether? Why this? You know, again, to even question my own faith. And I realized that as painful as the process was, it felt absolutely necessary and felt life was becoming more real, you know, and less theoretical. And then, you know, as I said, all the ups and downs of a typical emotional teenager, one thing that always prevented me from giving into the nihilism, you know, to the option of choosing for, you know, the lack of meaning, was the amazing testimony that this friend herself, the Kika, was throughout her disease. I could witness the beauty of a community of people moved by her and being moved to accompany her in that journey. And she lived that experience of suffering as a regular saint would, I would say, you know, in the simplicity that maybe won't end up on the newspapers ever, but that changes the world, or it changed my life when you think about it, like, because it was the first time when I could see all these people caring for her, that not only I thought I could see myself doing that, but I also had to recognize that staying in front of this kind of situation, these persons, was extremely, extremely provocative and hence interesting for me. It was provoking me to be more myself. And so I would never, you know, if I could spend the rest of my life, you know, in that situation, I would gratefully do that. And it's interesting again, because now I'm slightly older, but it's always that, like, it strikes me sometimes to think back, first of all, of how the simple yes, that the way this person lived her disease, you know, which was really a very mysterious relationship between her and God, you know. I don't think she meant to affect my life in doing that, but she did, you know. She literally changed the course of my life, and I wouldn't be here today, you know, if it wasn't for the way she lived that condition. And again, it's always, I think, interesting for us to go back to that beginning and continuously rediscover that, because oftentimes there is always, everything is already there in that beginning, and we just need to rediscover that continuously. I like this quote from T.S. Eliot. I'm not that poetic, but this one I like. We shall not cease from exploring, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know that place for the first time. You know, so 30 years later, on the other side of the world, with a very different, you know, mindset, if you want, and different body mass index for sure. You know, I evolved like a group. But it's always that. It's always that going back to that original intuition that God took seriously, you know, as naive as it was. Some time ago, I had a clinic with a resident, a very smart guy, and he came to my clinic back 2 or 3 times, and he was all excited. And he was like, oh gosh, you really have interesting cases. Like, all your patients are interesting. And after 3 days that he was saying this, it was becoming a bit annoying almost. Then he said, I think I understood. Your patients are normal patients. It's the way you look at them that makes them exceptional. It's like for each one of them, you have a spin on their story that makes me see what's exceptional that patient, and that makes working with you so interesting. And it was beautiful because, like, sometimes it takes someone else that comes from the outside and gives you back what you maybe have acquired, you know, even almost without thinking about it. And I would dare to say also that's the reason why I'm so passionate about the research we do. There's many people here today that work with me on several clinical trials. There is a very unusual but practical form of offering hope to our patients and trying to give them something that can be as tailored as possible. You know, patients asked us to be looked as for whatever is exceptional of their story, both their personal journey, like Nicola was saying, and also what is unique of their cancer, and try to bet on that. And they don't like it when we approach even their disease, you know, as the one size fits all. So this is just a very simple example, not so simple. An example of trial that we had running for a long time, and many of us put lots of work in this one, where we were taking blood tests from each patient with prostate cancer that had failed all treatments, and we were running on these on this blood test from prostate cancer patients, a very sophisticated analysis that looks for DNA from the cancer cells released to the bloodstream. And then we had available, as you see here, something between like about 8 possible, you know, experimental agents, and depending on which mutations we would find in the DNA from the bloodstream of that particular patient, we were trying to match that patient to a treatment that could address that mutation, or we hoped so. So this is also where oncology is going now. You're trying to personalize the treatment, at least for the disease. We're still maybe a bit behind personalizing it for the person, but that's another story. But at least personalizing it for the disease is becoming very popular. So we have now access to all these tests that can look at the DNA of each cancer patients, of each cancer in a more detailed way. And we are trying to, and it's a whole bunch of new information we're trying to make sense of. And sometimes it's not even clear what we can do about this. With Mark and other colleagues, it's been about 5 years now we have been running this molecular tumor board, which sometimes feels like a waste of time, but it's not. It's our attempt to, first of all, educate ourselves, to be open to the unexpected, even to be open even to what is unexpected in the genes of the cancer of a patient. And we discuss, because we have many patients now that through several ways can have access to this type of tests, whether through trials or through private funding. Sometimes we even had an access program developed for them. And we can see, all the genes that are abnormal, more of what we used to see before of all the genes that are abnormal in their cancer. And we discussed more than 350 cases. And maybe it's only just a handful of patients that did actually find the right match for that mutation and ended up responding to it in an exceptional way. But again, the exercise itself, like if we were to run a p-value on whichever statistics, I don't know that it would come out to be impactful on our patient's life. But I think it's impactful on the way we want to look at their cancer and be open to the unexpected. We even had one miracle, a woman that Andrea took care of for a long time, who received, when she was in palliative, she was already prepared for palliative care, and she had a very miraculous response. As you can see here, her skin metastasis disappearing on a targeted therapy that was chosen based on the genes we found. And she has no evidence of cancer relapse now 5 years later, 4 years later, which is really exceptional. So I called her, and she had a beautiful problem mentally and even psychologically to restart living after she was prepared to die, and also to explain this to her children, which was a whole another adventure. But just to say that it takes one miracle to keep you going, let's say, definitely unexpected. It's difficult to explain why I am a creative oncologist, but maybe I'll try to give you an example, a very practical example of the story of this woman, without trying to be too technical and not to bore you out early in the morning on a Sunday. She's a very anxious woman with a strong family history because they have also a mutation underlying in their family. And she presents in 2015 with not at our hospital yet at the point, with the right breast cancer, a very aggressive form, even still hormonal dependent at that point. So she had all the treatments to try and cure this cancer, obviously with surgery, rounds of chemotherapy. She got anti-hormonal therapy pills. And then when she was on anti-hormonal therapies, they found out almost by chance that there were two small but very clear metastases in the sternum, and they were biopsy proven. They were proven to be metastatic breast cancer. So at this point, she's stage 4. And the usual rule for stage 4 breast cancer is that it's an incurable disease, except the miracle we just saw. And so at that point, she came to seek for a second opinion in our hospital, and it triggered a memory that was buried somewhere in my brain of a case I saw many, many years ago in Italy, maybe even as a resident, of a patient that underwent a sternectomy for isolated sternal metastasis, and the cancer never appeared to return. And so I actually did, I looked up a little bit more about this, and it's a bit of an isolated, it's a very rare, but not so rare actually, pattern of metastatic spread, the isolated sternal metastasis. And there's also a theory, because the rule for which we assume that metastatic disease is incurable is that we presume that the fact that the cancer presents far away from the local-regional site is because of spreading through the bloodstream, and at the point is becoming almost like an infection. You don't cure it with surgery. You don't cure COVID with surgery. And but there's a theory that sometimes the spread to the sternum in particular might also happen through a more local-regional lymphatic pathway, so the internal mammary nodes can send some micrometastatic cells, if you want, to the sternum, and maybe, especially when it comes down to the sternum, a metastasis that is not necessarily a sign of a more spread disease. Again, there's not many statistics. I looked it up. You have about n equals 20-something, but they all seem to have this small case series with aggressive local regional treatment, even in the context of metastatic disease, and patients are seemingly doing well, sometimes even with a median follow-up of 10 years. So I proposed this seemingly aggressive approach to this patient that was actually totally on board and actually very happy, not only because we gave her, and again, in this situation, it's always a bit of a balance. Like you don't want to sell false hopes to your patients. You want to keep it very real, and so I had to really make sure, like it's a bit of an art, and I'm still working on it, in proposing something a bit outside the boxes, but not wanting to oversell that, making sure the patient understands the uncertainty behind that, and that you cannot promise any reasonable statistics on the likelihood of this aggressive approach paying off. No? So it's really important that the patients be involved in these decisions and understands the uncertainty about that. We agreed to to go all in. We had this surgeon that was very agreeable. So she had a kind of chemotherapy that was different from the one she had before, because we chose that chemo precisely to target the mutation that is running in her family and in her cancer. She underwent sternectomy, so like surgical resection, a big surgical resection of a metastatic spread that is not usually something you would do for patients with stage 4 disease. And then she even had 3 years, we got access through her private insurance to a medication, a new oral drug that targets again that mutation that we presume caused her cancer, and she got 3 years of that. And now she's almost 5 years after the sternectomy, and if you want to send a couple of praises her way, that would be more than accepted. But like she appears to be doing well, and we're still not out of the woods, but we feel that we gained some time, and certainly we gained some recognition from the patient, appreciating that she was looked at for what was exceptional and unique of her case. What we could also say, thinking a bit outside the boxes. A bit of a similar case was more recently with another young woman. She's beautiful inside and out, very kind, very sensitive. She has a very present husband and 2 wonderful young kids. She discovered the breast cancer while she was breastfeeding, the second newborn. And she was initially also falsely reassured, which, it's probably just, breastfeeding changes. And it was, that led to a bit of a delayed diagnosis. So when the cancer, was finally diagnosed, it wasn't clear that it was that curable after all. We again, even with Mark, who was taking care of her, we decided to still try to be as curative as possible and go relatively aggressive, if you want, again, sharing the uncertainty about that with her. And she seems to be doing quite well now a few years later. She's about 35, I believe now. Another confounding factor is that her sister had a very similar history. So she also found, like 2 years later, the same type of cancer that is not supposed to be hormonally driven, what we call triple-negative breast cancer, also while she was breastfeeding, which created a bit of a panic in the family that these cancers could be somehow related to pregnancy. And we talked to the geneticist, we did all the tests in the world, and it turns out we couldn't find any mutation, which leaves us a bit like, you don't have a reason to explain why 2 young sisters would have cancer so early, but it still leaves you a bit, unsettled, like feeling that maybe you just haven't found why this family is at risk for breast cancer. We still believe that the predisposition they must have is probably not related to hormones. And this led to a very interesting discussion with her, because in a very, all of this uncertainty, all these criteria had to became all of a sudden very relevant when she came out with a very honest personal question is, do you think I'd be crazy if I pursue another pregnancy now, And, what an honor to be involved in this question. The question that someone, opens up their heart to you, wanted to look together as something so dear to them and so valuable to their life, much beyond their survival, And it was actually a very difficult question to answer, because there's so much that we understand that we don't understand of, of this family or their history. And it wasn't a question that we could just solve it with a 15-minute chat. We took 3 meetings where I was also reasoning out loud with them, basically try to ponder the pros and the cons. And it got down to be as specific as asking her husband, like if she were to have this 3rd child and then her cancer comes back and she dies from cancer, would you feel overwhelmed by having a 3rd child to care for or not? That's the kind of honest discussion that sometimes needs to take place in the concreteness of these aspects. But you really want to make sure that they don't take a decision, with a lack of understanding of all the factors, but you're also just not a provider of all the factors, all the statistics, and then it's your choice. I cannot tell you how to live your life. It's another way of being together in looking at what we understand of such a mysterious reality. The reason for the coffee in the picture is that after they decided to pursue this pregnancy, she also asked me if I could meet her parents, because they were freaking out at this idea. So we had coffee with her parents in a coffee shop to tell them she could die, but not because of the pregnancy. And they went, "Thank you, doctor." Anyway, it was a beautiful coffee, beautiful family. And this is maybe a particularly complex example of what is the reality of having cancer. A cancer diagnosis, whether curable or not, that's also very interesting. Like we were saying yesterday, simply tears apart the false illusion that we all have as persons, that we are in control, or that the goal of our days is to remain in control and for things to go the way that we have planned. That's how we all wake up in the morning, and the reality happens, whether it's cancer or something more romantic, and it's always different than we have planned, and that somehow is why life is beautiful. But for our patients to see that it's beautiful for life to ruin their plans is not so easy. It's a journey that needs to be done. I think yesterday with Tamara's testimony, we had a shining example of what the beauty of such a journey, when it's a real healing. We have patients that are cured, and are not able to go back to living, because it's like the veil was torn apart, and the awareness of how fragile life is leaves you unsettled forever, if you don't do a work for accepting that. Or even in a palliative context, like Nicola was saying, even patients where the prognosis is clearly guarded, and there's not much uncertainty on whether this person will die or not, you can see patients, I would say, adding extra suffering to their path by constantly trying to manage what is manageable in an obsessive way. One thing is good that we have options, it's good we make decisions, it's good that you feel empowered, but it's a fine line between wanting to be a protagonist of your own history, like Tamara was saying yesterday, or when you become obsessive by controlling. The title of this book that Dr. Lapointe published recently, a couple of years ago, he was a wonderful head of palliative care at the Jewish, refers probably to what we see in this past New Year's, that even the request for euthanasia, and in many cases not really becoming a way to address a physical suffering that is really untreatable, because it's extremely exceptional, thank God. But it's really more of this, if you want, temptation to try and control what you can, even in that moment, for which you choose the hour and the time, in a way that makes you feel that you are regaining some sense of control, And that's really striking, because up until the end, whether your cancer is cured or not, it's always this struggle between accepting that not being in control is good or is something to fight against. And again, the cancer diagnosis obviously opens up an amount of needs and neediness from our patient that makes it very uncomfortable for them and very uncomfortable for us as well. It's not easy to stay in front of someone with a constant realization that you cannot make this person happy, that you cannot solve their problems. You can accompany them, leave them together, but it'd be foolish to think that I can, fulfill their needs. At the same time, though, this extreme neediness and the uncomfortableness of getting involved at this level on my end as well creates the soil for some of the truest, deepest, I would say even purest interaction I've had in my life as a human being, sometimes more pure and true and honest than I have with my regular friends, if you want. I was also provoked with, like Mark was, by this article that he quoted on the first day we met, and maybe it's a bit too easy for us to blame the bureaucracy, the paperwork, and the whole administrators for our lack of, fulfillment at work. Some and what struck me also in the passage of this article was that he's asking us, what is the weight that we give to human acts, acts of benevolence and kindness? How do we account for that? How are they recognized? How is real care recognized? But the question is, do I really need someone to recognize that on my behalf? Or can I recognize it for myself? It would be nicer if the administrators were to tap my shoulder and say, good job for getting, for really caring about your patients. That's maybe an extra, but I don't think I need that external validation, to say how I want to work. One of the greatest discoveries from this MedConference for me was that even administrators are human beings. I never thought. Just kidding. And it's interesting because, again, in oncology, we are faced with all these situations. Tamara was also anyway, like this, like sometimes like you see like a family context, you say like, is there really no end to like lack of fairness? Like you can really face pain in its most unfair, seemingly unfair forms. And a funny way that the system has, I think, to try and respond to that is maybe the illusion that we can build systems so tightly regulated that we just need to follow protocols, you know. And your duty is not to get hurt by what you see or to get emotional about what you see, but just follow the protocols because we have a protocol in place. You know, again, that's really not the kind of protocol that we saw from Emanuela yesterday, but you know, there are ways that we can develop protocols, and I'm not against protocols, you know, obviously, it's not, but there are ways of conceiving of protocols that are really dehumanizing medicine, and if it's not a continuous, you know, dialogue with the reality. And then it becomes this implicit expectation that patients are expected to comply with the way we function. Or think of the example of the biopsy of Tamara yesterday, you know, that was really telling, you know, to the point that, you know, she gets an exception because she's a physician, and we are so trained to think that, you know, exceptions, okay, like, but it's not really fair after all when you think about it, which is not fair if you want. But my point is, at some point I wanted to make a slogan for oncology, only exceptions allowed, meaning that every patient is really exceptional, every story is unique. We cannot think that each patient may not need some sort of exceptions along the way. That would be a form of violence, you know, and that would be not personalizing medicine beyond personalizing the right drug for your cancer, but not the fact that your husband can walk with you to the biopsy if he's not going to faint when you see that. But again, do we really need the system to change for us to be happy? Do I need my administrators to come and tell me, we appreciate that you work in a human way? Might be nice, might not be nice. I find that my hospital is really a very human place, you know, all things considered, and that came into the factors I considered when I decided to leave my beautiful country and come back to this colder country to work in that place. And I'm very happy. But again, the fact that this place is a place where I can be myself, like Nicola was saying, where I can shape the way I care for patients the way I like, for me was invaluable. Like they couldn't get me in another hospital for a bigger salary, you know, if that wasn't part of the equation. And again, this beautiful picture that also Filippo used yesterday is just a powerful reminder that I do have a heart that I need to compare everything against and with, you know. At the end of the day, like Nicola was saying, I'm the one going home and able to tell myself if the way I live this day was fulfilling or not, if the way I stay with my patients was valuable to me, if reality impacted me in a way that I'm happier and I'm different than I walked in the morning or not. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and the last thing I want to do is to go and see people who are sick. But then that you realize that list of patients waiting for you is what is really saving your day, you know, taking you out of your own moodiness to look at something else. And again, I would just dare to say, and I was really moved by Mary's point, you know, when she's saying sometimes you can tell it, sometimes you can be in a position to change things, sometimes you can just be in a position to tell at least yourself, it is not normal, or this is not how we're supposed to be, or even in a more positive way, this is how I want it to be. This is how I want my patients to, my clinic to run, you know. Just a very few practical examples, you know. The greatest revolution in my own personal life was to avoid double bookings in my clinic. Ooh, maybe I didn't change the world, but I changed the way my clinic is scheduled. When I arrived, it was very normal for secretaries just to pile up like 5 patients at 9 o'clock and 5 patients at 10. And by 11, you're not only 3 hours late, which I am anyway, but you're late despite having given 3 minutes to each one of these patients. And it's just been a very simple fight because everyone does that, it's expected of you. But the place where I work, thank God, is flexible enough so far that allows me to talk to the people that are booking the patients, say, I'm not Padre Pio, I cannot be in 2 places at the same time. I'm working on it, but give me time. So I can only be in 1 room with 1 patient at a time. So if you put 3 patients at 9, it's just a not realistic plan. You know, that's not how I want to start my day. And you know, every new person that comes, it's a new training, they probably think I'm a bit difficult. But that's as simple as that. Like, you know, at the end of the day, you know, and it's funny because for the first years I was working, I would always work in front of one of my senior colleagues, a very good friend also. And I could see him also being a bit victim of that system. Like, you know, he had 2 days clinic, 2 days per week of clinic, because the other 3 days he was supposed to do, he was doing research, sorry. And it's like, but the patients were piling up. We have the good problem now in oncology. We are curing more people, or people are living longer. So like our clinics are getting more and more loaded, which is a good problem to have. It was like, oh, today I saw 25 patients. The next week, oh, I saw 40 patients today. Like, it was crazy, it was crazy, it was crazy. And then I was just adding an extra day. Like, I was starting to 2 days a week, then 3, then 4. Now I'm at 5. I don't know. But the point is, there's no more days to add. But the point is, I was happier to add extra days. So like to book my clinic until 6 and not until 4, and have to rush through that 30 patients. And I never told him anything, but I noticed at some point he also added a 3rd day in the clinic. And he started seeing like patients like more spread out. And I was like, it's a bit more human like that. Again, not only for the sake of the patient, but also for this person that, like all of us, needs to go home happier, like Nicola was telling us. Another thing that really got me to thinking was that I often have to sell chemotherapy to my patients, which is not an easy job to do. So as an Italian, I can sell a lot of things, even chemotherapy. But and sometimes it's just the same discussion that goes through that. The hair loss with this and the like. And sometimes you speak and you say, I just said the same thing for 15 minutes in the other room half an hour ago. Maybe I could group the patients together. Or even the idea of having a CD that would speak to the patients for you. Well, why are you laughing? This AI, that's coming. But at some point there was this project, like to have videos that patients can access where their oncologist tells them about the hair loss on chemotherapy. And then I said, no, that's not how I want to do it. Like, maybe it might appear to save 15 minutes of my time, but I don't think it's real efficiency. This moment where I'm conveying for the 10th time in the same day the same information is the first time I have to gauge how much this patient is understanding, what is how she's reacting to the hair loss. Some laugh about it, some cry for half an hour, some go to the cold cup, and it's an opportunity to encounter that person. It's also a wonderful exercise for me, because when you explain something, you have to tailor that to the person you're talking to. You cannot use, some people want to know all the details, and they come to PubMed updating me on the latest results, and other people just want to know as little as possible, and that's more than fair. One of the questions that was asked in that article is, how can you put back a little bit of heart in our interactions? It reminded me of a video we saw at our first glorious MedConference in Montreal. If you remember, there was the last MedConference before COVID, still when we could afford the chateau. And we had this wonderful video from Enzo Piccinini, the surgeon from Italy. And it was moving for me to see a testimony that I actually saw live when I was living in Italy as a university student in this conference that he gave. And it was really interesting. He was saying, to answer a bit indirectly to that question that the article is asking, life is united. And again, wow, like the problem is not what is more polite for the patient, how can my life to be more united, That's my problem. How do I want to live my life? How do I want to live my work? Life is united if you put your heart in what you do. And the heart, like Elvira was saying yesterday, is not just your feelings, but it's an irrepressible desire for happiness, goodness, truth, justice. My desire for justice for my patients that are undergoing a seemingly unfair path. That constant desire that you cannot truly fulfill yourself. And I cannot fulfill this desire for myself and nor for my patients. And then he adds, putting your heart in what you do is possible if there is something greater than yourself. But this something bigger than you must be present. There is something to which you can say, here I am, And how many times, I don't know what he was thinking about this. He was thinking about Jesus or his patients or God or whatever, but in a way it's one and the same. Like for me, every day my patients are this opportunity to be put in front of something greater than myself. Sometimes just being in silence in front of them, or just say, here I am. You can be the most important person in the world, but you need to be moved by what is outside of you. I was very provoked these days by the other question of Mary and the whole path of discovery that Andrea Mariani had for us live, after, who do I work for, and then Andrea was translating that also to who do I belong, in a way. And I would add maybe to the answer that Mary was giving in her in your presentation, that I work also first and foremost for myself. And I don't think that's being selfish. I work because I need to be saved. I need to be happy. I need, to be fulfilled at the end of the day. And again, you can say this in a way that is not healthy for you and for your patients, but you can also say this in a way that is actually creating a healthier relationship with your patients. The other thing that really stands out for me was when Amanda, the first night, was telling us that we can be a shelter to the wounds, to the needs of our patients, in our own wounds, in our own needs. And this, one of the greatest discoveries for me in the past few years, is that in front of my patient, I encounter my patient needs not so much for the answers I can give them, but more for the needs that, my own needs that correspond to their needs. Just to give a few examples, patients need to be accepted. Sorry, to accept the uncertainty, to accept the uncertainty, as we said before. Even this woman having to decide about a pregnancy or not in such an uncertain context. And I need to recognize every day that I am not God. I suffer from the same uncertainty. I propose a treatment, and I don't know if it's going to work. I hope and pray it will, but I cannot promise that, And this also gives a very realistic attitude to the way you do something. It's almost as if there is a prayer attitude in the chemotherapy you are prescribing, because you understand it's not ultimately up to you to make that work the way you wish. Patients need to be accepted. They need to be accepted even in a cultural performance, and and they can easily feel useless if they're bedridden, or like less of a woman if they don't have a breast, and all these kind of things. I need to be forgiven. I need to be forgiven by them for my incapacity, for my shortcomings, for all the times that I wasn't present in my interaction with them. And it's a mutual forgiveness and acceptance that really goes both ways. Patients need to be seen, and I also have a patient, persons in the end, right? We are all persons, and it's true. The patient as a person, the person as a patient, the physician as a patient. We all need to be seen, and we all need to see. I need to be surprised every day, as I was saying before, by what is going to be shown to me on that day. And this need of mine to see reality, to be provoked, to be surprised, is what really corresponds to the patient's needs to be seen. It's not an effort, like Mary was telling us. It's not an effort to be moved, but you can just desire to be moved, and then there's the space for that to happen. And they need to love and to be loved, which really goes both ways. The other day I found myself crying for this woman that I'm sending to die at home. She's 80-something, 85. It's a very natural death. She's been expecting this, and she's super ready. And I was crying because she's the one that brings the candies. She gives me candies every time she comes to the clinic, like my grandmother used to do. And I was like, who's going to give me candies now? Or even maybe on a more serious note, when I went back to Italy for that 1 year, the rumors were starting to spread, in the patient, in the waiting room, and I would sometimes enter the room and patients were very grumpy, waiting for me. I heard you're leaving us. Where are you going? Looking for money, looking for resources? I said, no, I'm going to attend to some needs of my family. And immediately that changed. That changed their attitude. And I will pray for your family. I will pray for your mother. You do what you have to do. Even this kindness towards me, or here the rule of I also have a rule of the two, like when two patients on the same day, doctor, you make sure you rest, you take care of yourself. I know I look like shit, I need to sleep. But they do worry about me. You go there saying, I'm here to take care of you. Like, doctor, you should really take care of yourself. Okay, I got the message, thank you. I'm really closing, so if I'm going a bit long, but the great discovery for me, in particular last year, in the beauty, 2 years ago, in the beauty of doing palliative care, a bit like Nicola was describing, was the discovery that we bring hope to our patients, first of all, from what we see, even before what we do or what we say, which can only be a natural consequence of what we see. Otherwise, it's artifactual. Otherwise, it's added on. If we look at the patient for what they're missing, for what they cannot do, or cannot have, for what they lost, then we just, and even if we don't say anything, that's really surprising. We discussed with Max yesterday. That's really in the way you look at them. And patients are so hypersensitive. They're in a condition where all the receptors for humanity are hyper-expressed. And you can say nothing. You can just talk about the technical aspects of surgeries. But if deep down you're talking to someone that you don't value, they know it. And you're just adding to their anxiety, to their frustration, to feel it inadequate. Again, for me, as you may have understood, for me, you know, my job is a continuous dialogue also with my own faith, you know, and I understand that my faith is not so much a list of things I already know, or precepts, or rules I need to follow, or things I'm not supposed to do because I'm Catholic, but it's really a continuous conversion of my gaze, you know, driven from my faith, educating the way I see reality, sometimes just inviting me to a silence, you know, in front of the mysteriousness of or is playing out in front of me, and that feels so sacred sometimes. I just give a very quick example of this, and because sometimes this same willingness to see what is there and not what is missing is given back to us by the families of the patients that we care for. Last year, 2 years ago, when I was in Italy doing home care with Nicola, we took care of this woman with a very useful husband. You know, I say sometimes, I often joke, some of you might have heard this joke, that when you treat breast cancer, you lose faith in the category of husbands, because most husbands are kind of useless, apparently. But that helps you to make note of the one exceptional, useful husband that can be present in a way that is not suffocating. And this Massimo was really like the pinnacle of the exceptionality for me last year. He was caring for his wife, who was a teacher, and together with their son, who was a cook, and Massimo was an engineer, they decided to bring her back home for the last few days. This woman was suffering from a brain cancer, which had made her totally disabled, bedridden. And when we first went to start our, you know, service at home, it wasn't even clear how present she was to reality, you know, because she could just move one arm and maybe stare around in a way that wasn't very clear, you know, if it was the expression of any awareness. And so I asked Massimo and his son if they had the impression that she was actually still there, present and aware of reality. And they reported two very specific things, you know, in the answer. The first one was when we got home, she really stared around and looked in wonder, and we are sure that she recognized that she was at home. And this was worthy all the headaches, you know, to bring her home with ambulance and all of that. And then when the son went at some point to close to her, and he took her arm, she played with his ear in a way that was their intimate way, if you want, personal way of cuddling one another, which was very specific. It was not just a generic caress. It was really the way she used to play with his ear. And so he understood that she knew who he was and that he was there. And I'm moved by the simplicity of these two episodes that seem to give, you know, so much hope to them. You know, knowing that it was not going to last for long, if not like maybe days at best. I just said something along the line of, it's really not much that we have at this point, but that's what we can rejoice for, you know. And Massimo, in a way, corrected me and said, "You're right. It's not so much, but it is so much. No, there's so much in this." And it really moved me when he said that. You know, it's a true judgment. You know, to let yourself be moved by what is there, which is always so much. And last but not least, I think we are not. We bring hope for what we see, not in the sense of how much we analyze of our patients, because again, there's a way that we can see reality, which is suffocating to us and to others. I think you know that you are really seeing reality when you let yourself be provoked to the way to wonder, or wonder even to the point of recognizing the beauty, even the most absurd situations, like the ones that we see. And one would think, you know, again, for me, if I had to tell you in one sentence, the greatest surprise of 1 year in palliative care was the amount of beauty I witnessed. And then maybe to the point that I would encourage everyone to do a rotation in palliative care, or even more than that. And you realize that we are not trustworthy to our patients, to our family, if they don't feel that we are first of all moved by the beauty of what we see, the beauty of that person, the value of that person that becomes a sacred mystery for us. You know, sometimes you feel like you might want to kneel down in front of your patients. I mean, I never do it yet, but like you, if you are not moved first, you know, whatever you do after that is providing a service. And if I was the family of that patient, I would not want to be cared for by you. This is a very simple story, but just to tell you that after 1 year of palliative care, it was really entering my brain, this whole obsession of beauty. And there was this elderly woman we were caring for. She was 98, almost made it to 99, God bless her. And she was bedridden, and when we got to activate our service for her, she had been in bed now for several weeks. And so then she had all the stigma of the bedridden patient. So she had a very shiny white hair that she wasn't able to dye for a long time, and it was like a mane crown around her head, like sparks, like one of those Disney characters. And she had these very intense blue eyes. She had no dentures anymore. She was toothless, but like smiling so beautifully with these blue eyes that were piercing through, like the cutest elderly woman ever. And she was cared for by this super, devout and present little OCD daughter. And one weekend, she decides to all of a sudden get very sick and die in the space of 10 hours when I happen to be on call. So she goes from sometimes our patients play this trick, she goes from very stable to actively dying just in the space of a few hours. So I go to that home a couple of times, and then I'm preparing the death certificate, after she passes. And the daughter, a bit surprised maybe also by how the thing had unfolded, was who would have expected, who would have thought, oh, I can't believe it. And I was 99, right? No, just checking, maybe I'm missing a point here. And the poor again, she's 99, but she wasn't ready, and she had the right not to be ready. And maybe trying to be of some consolation, I go, your mom was a really beautiful person. I really liked your mom, she was really beautiful. And then she goes like this, and she goes, and she starts looking for something, she starts trafficking while I'm doing all the paperwork. And then she comes back with her picture from her mom, one of those document kind of ID kind of picture. And she goes, look at how beautiful my mom was. And here I see this woman that looks nothing like the woman I knew, with makeup, obviously teeth well in place, red hair, totally artificial, the Italian old woman that tries to be very serious and and in control, right? And I see this picture of this woman staring at me that looks like nothing the one I met, and I was and I didn't say this, thank God. So I was yes, you're right. But instead I was I prefer the version I knew. She looked more beautiful to me the way I met her, And it really struck me, even this almost subconscious thought that just came to the surface unexpectedly. And I was driving home realizing, oh my God, I better change job right away. No, I'm just kidding. This job is so beautiful that it's changing even the way I'm perceiving beauty. It's really changing my wires inside to see beauty in a different way. The last thing I want to say about, we were calling them, the first title of the slide was difficult patients, and then I changed it to challenging patients because it's a bit more, it's always easy to label someone as difficult and it's their problem. But challenging already opens up to your availability of being challenged. I can think of one young girl that was so scared because of what she saw in her mother going through chemo that she ran away at 28 and she wouldn't come back for her treatments for 2 years. And then thank God she eventually came back. The cancer had grown a lot, but it was still curable, and we were still able to fix that, we hope. Or another patient that comes to see me every 6 months and she does nothing, what I tell her, literally nothing. She's taking care of her cancer with the stones because she's a naturopath, and she has the right to do it the way she thinks. But it was and it's such a beautiful interaction we have every time. Where I think there is, again, it's too difficult to describe now, but I think it is a caring relationship in both ways, even if every time she leaves the room with her stones rather than my pills. Or the last patient I want to tell you very briefly about, this patient that came to me with a very difficult past history, lots of traumas. She had become extremely socially isolated, lots of anger in her life, to the point that when she was diagnosed with cancer, she absolutely didn't see a reason to treat that. And she was only 29 years old at that point. So, you know, sometimes you heard the history of Rose in like you need to have a reason for living, you know, to want to be cured. And that wasn't there, you know, and all my usual asset had to be reset from this, you know, and restart from scratches. You know, we got a whole team of friends around her to help her, and that somehow, you know, gave her some motivation to try treatments, and she even decided to try chemotherapy, which was a great surprise for me. But every cycle she was due for the chemotherapy, which required a hospitalization, was always a struggle, you know. And I was like, you know, she was opening up for treatment, and then I'm not sure if I'm coming. Yes, I'm coming. Yes, I'm doing it, and you know, and sometimes you try to be patient, and and you want the best for this person. You know, you really wish that this person can, one, maybe appreciate that she's alive. Two, want to live a bit longer. Three, get the treatments that can cure her or at least make her live much longer. And all of these things that we normally assume as a given, it was like a struggle every single cycle of chemotherapy, you know. And at some point, we even went crazy because we were looking for the cold cap because she didn't want to lose her hair. I had to fight some people to get this cold cap. And like, I really worked my butt off to get everything the way she wanted. And the day comes where she is supposed to come for the chemotherapy. I go to do the, you know, to accept the hospitalization and prepare the chemo prescription. It was a Sunday night. I was on call the whole weekend with the resident. I was exhausted. I go on Sunday night to see her, you know, expected to find a friend after all this time we were together. And this very moody person, she was like, I don't know if I want to do the chemotherapy tomorrow. I don't feel like. And I was like, you know what? I don't feel like either. Like, you know, I found that the limit between like caring and killing is very thin. I was like, but this was all going in my mind. I still have the strength to like put a straight face and say, you think about it, we sleep on it, I'll see you tomorrow morning. And then I leave the room and I start like swearing like I never did in all the languages I knew. But just the time, to go from the 7th floor to the main floor, and on the on the path to my car, I remember the point where the thought simply struck me, and it was like, there's an aspect where that's precisely why I like this patient. You know, how many times, even at MedConference, we talk about the challenging patients and the cases that really forced us to grow the most, no? And I was like, that's really why I like her, deep down. It's difficult to admit, but I like her because she's so irreducible to what I want, to the box I want to put her in. I have the best plan for her. There's nothing wrong, you know, with a plan where, you know, you're happy to live happily ever after, right? But it cannot be my plan for you. And there was a point where, like, in the dramaticity of accepting that, it was like making space for the unexpected, making space for the mystery that this person is beyond even the most perfect plan I can have for her. The last thing I want to say is that this availability to be struck by reality is only possible when you have a team. And the team is, like we were saying yesterday, is not only the people you work for, but the people with whom you feel you can be yourself, up to the point of being forgiven. And for me, this place, you know, its craziness, is the glorious picture of our first MedConference in Montreal, is a place that accompanies me throughout the year much more than just these days. Thank you.
Do we have space for maybe a couple questions? I mean, I have just one question, and then we'll take maybe one or two. Not really. One question. I mean, you spoke about it a little bit, Cristiano, and when you look at these two people, it seems that there's a lot of hope in their work and in their person, but it almost seems like a paradox, being hopeful and bringing hope to people on one hand, but at the same time, like you mentioned, you have to accept of not being in control in a lot of situations. So you have, Nicola, you work in palliative care, so there's no quote unquote hope because your patients are dying and are gonna die. And in your case, Cristiano, I mean, you do your best, of course, you try to save people's lives, but in some cases, you just can't. So what does it mean? Like, what does hope really mean in that sense? Like what? you want to come here maybe for the...
Short question is,
All you want. I can try to tell you a story about patients. A great story. Short story. I have a patient that I realized 2 years ago, Nino. He has some several problems, but in the last 2 months of his life, he is frequently septicemias. Sepsis. Okay, so I go to the person civil. So he had a few days that he was like in coma, and then he came back to life. And like 10 years before he died, he was looking at the television on the news, and while I was there, I helped him. And he tells me, do you hear about this news about this mother that forgive the killers of his son? I was, what? I was like, wow, that's a miracle. And I don't say nothing, and he tells me, that's bullshit. Nothing is free in life. Spine throat. I was like, oh, hey. And when I'm leaving his house, I was thinking about, it's not true, I'm here for free for you, for example. But he didn't see it. The next day, I came back to his house, and Nino was told me, I read all this. Yeah. We don't talk about it. I do what I have to do, and he tells me, can you go to my wife, Nina? Sounds Italian people. Because she has something for you. I was thinking that she needs something, like some drugs, some stuff. And she brings me a bottle of wine, a homemade wine. It's terrible. And she tells me, it's the favorite one of Nino. The favorite one of Nino. And she tells me to give to you. Okay, while I was going to another patient that morning, I was thinking, okay, you say, Nino says that nothing is free in life. And you believe it. And after 24 hours, you give me something for free? So, there's hope in this life, okay. I see. I was thinking that Nino is, for me, in heaven for that. Just for that, for sure is in heaven. Because you can't kill the hope you have, finally, I think. And you want to believe it from one side, but maybe I think that you can risk, I think I speak about Nino, you can risk yourself if you use just a little space to risk. And that case was the relationship that we had.
Thank you.